Okay, so today I'm going to go through how to get an existing HTML template into the Rails project. And then once we have that in place, we'll be adding more embedded Ruby commands and going back through that. But I want to get this started so you can start working on your project, which is due a week from Wednesday. So the first project is to take the website that you created last quarter in Ruby 2 and put this into this layout so that we can have all of our pages look consistently. Now, one of the nice things about a framework like this, like PHP or ASP or Rails, is that most of the time we only have to write the HTML once for the header, for instance, and the navigation. We don't have to create 10 different HTML pages that all have the same code on them, like you've done in the past. For your 130 class, for instance, you had to create an ending website that had 5 or 6 pages on it. If you made a change to the navigation, how many different files did you have to change? Every single one of them. So the nice thing about this dynamic website is that I change it in one place and it gets reflected across the entire website. So that's the idea. So everything we talked about last week is in this layouts file. This is the layout HTML file that, let me bring this over here, that describes what your web page will look like. And then what does this do here then? Right, and that brings, depending on the location I'm at, based on the URL that comes into the Rails application, it pulls the right view data, the view HTML, and plops it in there. So the rest of the website looks the same. It's just I'm replacing a little piece of that. So where do you think I would put navigation type elements, for instance? In here. This is my main page. If you've done ASP, this is like your master page. If you've done PHP, there is no equivalent to that because it's you might think of these pieces as includes. You would include the header and include the footer, and then your rest of your pages here. It's similar to that. But this is just nicer, I think. So first of all, any questions so far? Any question? No? All right. So first of all, I want to go and use a template. I'm not going to create my own. And I told you that you could use one of these. These are free HTML5 templates because at this point I'm not concerned about your styling so much, although it does count. But you should know how to do this, create pages and style sheets. But that's not what the class is about. I don't want you to spend all your time on this, styling. I want you to learn the Rails intricacies instead. So I'm going to use this one called Cookie Cook. And it's you can look at the demo here. It's got menus up here and some aside extra stuff and a bottom page, a bottom footer, which seems to be the style these days, and that would show up on every page. And my main content is going to be this part here. That is the part that's going to change based on whether I'm on the recipe page or whatever. All right, so I'm going to download that template, and it will download as zip file that I can open. And let's open it, put it on my desktop. And here are the files that I have for my style. So I have CSS files in here. I don't have any JavaScript, so maybe this wasn't the best one to do, but I have images. And all of these need to be put into the right place in Rails. So first of all, we're going to take the images and the style sheets and everything and put them into the right folder. So let's shrink these down so I have both folders on the same both windows here. Now, we'll talk more about how this all works, this whole asset system, but for now, everything is going to go into this assets folder. And as I've taught in all my classes, I separate these out into 3 different folders. And that's the way Rails does it. That's why I force you guys to do that in all my classes. So in images, what do you think goes here? The images. So right now, I only have the Rails ping, which comes built when the Rails gets created. So over here, I'm going to copy all of my images here. And I'm going to move them into my images folder. So I can just drag and drop those and copy them into place. And now I have images in my images folder. So that's the first thing I need to do. That's easy to do. All right? So the next thing I want to do is take my style sheets, and I want to put those where? Into my style sheet folder. Very good. So we'll take both of those, styles and print, and we'll put them into my style sheets folder. Copy those into place. And these fonts these are special web fonts that are downloaded by the browser. So I'm going to put these are not a normal asset that Rails tracks. So I'm going to put them into my public folder. Remember, this is the root of my website. That's the main web page, the main directory where everything else would go. So I'm going to put those 2 font pieces in my public folder. All right, now all I have left is this index.html page. And what is this? It's HTML, right? It's just text. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it something so that it doesn't get loaded into anything special. And I'm just going to call it .text. And I'm going to copy that into my public folder just so I have it available in my RubyMine project, because that's what I'm going to copy pieces out of. So let's look at that file. So that's pretty much all I need from my template that I have. This is what the HTML is that I downloaded from their site. So if you look at the top, what type of HTML is this? 5, right? The doc type has gone back to a very simple system. Why do you think they even have this doc type in here anymore? For Quirks mode, right? For all of the IE browsers, so they don't revert to IE5. If Internet Explorer doesn't find a doc type, they go back in time to their HTML5 version, and it looks terrible. So that's the only reason they left the doc type in that I can tell. Yeah.
I have a question. Question is, because this one is HTML just one page. If HTML have 3-4 pages, and I put all the pages in the folder, so it's work or no?
Well, you're missing how Rails will do this. We're going to have pieces of HTML for every page. You're not going to have separate pages of HTML. We're going to have pieces of HTML pages. Your nav typically doesn't change across all of the pages on a website, right?
Yeah, sometimes you have to.
Sometimes it might, but in general, your site should stay the same. Otherwise, it confuses the user in the first place. If your site changes too much, your nav is on the top and now the next page is on the side, it's confusing to people, right? So the consistency is important. And again, remember what Rails professes is convention over configuration. So by convention, websites should be consistent. And there are ways in Rails to have separate things like that. But for now, we're not going to get into that. All right, so I need to take this page and break it up into pieces and put them into this layout file that I have. All right, so let's go back to my layout, application.html.erb, and I'm going to replace this with pieces from this index.txt file that I have. All right? So let's go to the top. We have this language HTML, and it comes all the way down to the body. I need to take pieces of this out and put it into the other one. They have this IE5 script, so I'm going to take that out and put it over here in my head. Now, I want to leave some of this stuff that Rails has in here. All right, let me close this out so I have more room. They have these style sheet link tags and JavaScript link tags, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we have this CRSF meta tags. This is a method in Ruby to try to prevent cross-site scripting. All right, it's a way to protect forms from being intercepted by hackers. And notice that these are all in embedded Ruby commands. All right, so these are actually interpreted by Ruby and replaced with code before it actually gets shipped out to the browser. This style sheet link tag is a method inside of Rails that takes some parameters. The first one is a string, and then this is looks like a hash element. All right, so these are methods inside of Rails. This is a method inside of Rails, and it will actually include the JavaScript, etc. for me, and we'll get to that in a second. So what else do I need? It didn't have a language, so I'm going to take my character set meta tag, which you should know what these are by now. I'm going to change my title instead of demo 2. I'll call it Dave's Recipes. All right? Instead of Cookie Cook. All right, so I have everything out of here. We'll deal with the style sheets in a minute. Then inside of the body, this is all using HTML5 tags now. This nav is a new tag in HTML5. And it's recognized by browsers that recognize HTML5 as a navigation element. And so search engines like Google, for instance, they can use that nav element to return better results in your search pages, things like that. They can put little links there right under the search results, etc. If an old browser sees a nav element in a tag like this, what do you think it does to it? It doesn't ignore it. It turns it back. Basically, it treats it like a div. So this is all backwards compatible. So you don't have to worry about an older browser. You just don't get all of the functionality you might get out of a newer browser, but it won't just ignore it completely. I can create my own tags all I want. It won't display the word nav. It'll display the stuff inside of it. So one way to think about these new elements are that the tags are like named divs. Like you guys in the 130 class, you guys did that magazine layout. And you did lots of divs, right? And you named your divs, you gave them an ID, or you gave them a class so that you could access them. HTML5 took a lot of the common things and made their own tags out of them. So we have a header tag. This is not the head tag. It's a header tag that is treated differently by the browsers if you have one. We have a nav tag. We have section tags. These are just, you can think of these just like named divs. We can give them IDs and classes, just like we give a div an ID and a name, an ID and a class. We can have sections within sections. We have this tag called article. We have an open article and a close article. And these can be styled differently now, just in our style sheets, just like we would a div. But it makes us format very structured. Our HTML file becomes very structured this way. So anything, instead of having a bunch of divs laying around, we now have an article, and it helps it structure it. So this is a side. This is the sidebar on the left. So if you look at the HTML, let's look at the demo. This is this piece here on the left. And since it's in its own tag again, we can style it, we can position it to the left, and do all that kind of fun stuff. Let's see, there's a closed section. And here's the footer. So instead of having a div with an ID of footer, we just have a tag called footer. And that footer can have other sections in it, other aside tags, and then we close our footer, and there we are, we're done. All right, we have a div enclosing the entire page. This wrapper has a wrapper div. And why do you think we have that? Yeah, we can style the entire content of the page that way so that when I shrink it, it stays centered on the page. See that? That entire wrapper, and then the background comes through if it needs to, etc. All right, so I need to take these elements out of here and replace my yield somewhere in here. Where do you think the yield would go? All right, so I can take all of this section out of here, this main content and the sidebar, but I want the sidebar there. And he has this, whoever created this template, he has end of content. So the content, this is the main content of the site. This is where I'm going to dynamically fill this piece with stuff from my database or the About Us content or a form or whatever is going to go and be replaced in the middle of this. So I'm going to take the header and up to the body and take that out and put it into my application file above the yield. And then I'm going to yield, and I'm going to have a closing. Go back to my HTML. This main section here, I'm going to leave this content is the only piece I'm not going to have in here. So I forgot a piece. This section ID I need as well. So we'll put that back in here. And then in I need my aside, which is the sidebar all the way down. All right, then I missed. I didn't put this in here either. Then I just did that one. So I need the closing section all the way down, like I said, all the way down here, and I'll leave the comment in there because they were nice enough to give me this. And there we go. So I've got my HTML all in here. I've got my yield somewhere in here. Here's my yield. And this is going to be the content that gets inserted whenever I load a page. So let's just go look at that and see what I have. If I go to my hello page here, I ran it. It is running. Okay, any questions while this loads? I don't know why it's so slow. Yeah.
When we build our project to start doing this, is there a naming convention you want us to use for the project?
For the whole project itself?
The Rails project itself?
No, I don't care.
You don't care?
Any other questions? So there we go. It loaded. I have my hello Dave. And remember, I put the image in here. And I've got some issues with my page, but I have to work with that. I have to figure out my styles and things like that. So, Yep. Yep. So, we're getting there. Got it close. And let's bring back out our project, and we can start looking at the assets themselves. Yes? So let's look at the differences. The few things that I had here. We'll start by making sure that my style sheet is being loaded here. So here we had two different style sheets. I had a print and a styles.css. So the way Rails deals with this is through this assets folder. And they changed this in version 3.1. And the reason, they have a bunch of reasons for it. I'm not sure I agree with any of them. But one of the reasons is they could apply this Sass interpreter. So I could write Sass code directly in here, which is just a higher form of CSS. We'll talk about that later. I can actually have variables and things like that in my CSS code. And Rails will compile that from the Sass code into CSS. And when it does that, then it can ship that out to the browser. It does the same thing with the JavaScript code. We have a higher level of JavaScript called Coffee, which is a higher level language than JavaScript. And so you need to compile that. It compiles that down into JavaScript source code, and the JavaScript is what gets sent back to the browser. All right. Same with images. In order for caching to work, images are one of the worst things to deal with if you have an established website. So if you have a file called header, like this header image.jpg, and later on the people want to come along and change that and modify that image to have something else on the same image, but you're leaving the name the same because you don't want to change any of the HTML. So the problem is, then how do you tell users that your image has changed? Because browsers are so, what's the right word? They're so hard over about keeping images in their cache, so they don't have to keep going out and getting the new image. They would show the old image that's on your computer every time. So how do you tell all of these millions of people that you have a new image out there? Well, the only way to do that really effectively is to change the name of the image. And you don't want to do that in your source code. That causes all kinds of other problems. So the way Rails got around that is that when you compile, when you move this to production, Rails actually takes this image and puts a timestamp on the end of the image name itself. So it'll be header image with a long bunch of numbers .jpg. So if you change the file date changes, and hence a new name gets produced. The browser sees it as a new name and downloads the new version from the server. So it breaks the cache that the clients have on their own site, on their own local computer. So to do that, they moved this into the assets folder so that they could compile that ahead of time. Before, they used to do it on the fly. Whenever they would check the image date and see that it changed and change the name and display the new HTML. Well, that takes a little bit of time to do that, microseconds to do that, but on every request that adds up. So they have a way when we go to production they call it pre-compiling the assets folder, and it goes through and makes sure all the names are correct, and then it ships those out. It doesn't have to do that during every request from that point on. So that's a short, quick view of the assets folder. So inside of the style sheet, let's start with the style sheets. There's a file here called application.css. This is what looks like only a commented out CSS file. It doesn't look like there's anything in there. But in fact, they call it a manifest file that actually gets compiled into an application.css file. All right? And it includes, so this is actually code here. This star equals require self, that's actual code that the Rails compiler does and sees that and includes all the style sheets in that folder. So I can specifically say require, this is just like an include. This require tree says include every CSS file that's in this folder. So it includes each one of them, all three of these that are here, one after the other. Now if I have to have a style sheet above another one, if I have to have a dependency that one style sheet is loaded first and then a second one after that, like a jQuery, I would have to put that here. I'd say require and then the name of the specific style sheet and then let the rest of the tree get loaded. And what this does is, in the compilation stage, it compiles and appends all of the CSS files into one big old huge long CSS file. Why do you think it does that? One less request to the server to get a file, and it also caches that entire CSS file on the local computer now. So it doesn't matter too much if this is 200 or 300K worth of CSS. It's going to capture it once, download it, store it on the local computer, and it won't have to request that file again from your server. So it's a way of kind of pre-compiling all of this. It also can, in terms of the JavaScript, we've talked about Google. Have you ever seen Google's JavaScript code? If we go to Google, that's the French version, google.com, and if I look at the source here, here is their JavaScript. Okay, they actually have JavaScript in line, and it's a little tough to read, right? Very tough to read. It's not indented correctly, so they would fail my class. But why do you think they do that? You can't steal it very easily, although it is possible. But it also shrinks the size down. So the amount of data here that it has to ship back to the browser is a lot smaller. So look at these functions. There's a function in CSS right here. And it converted all the variables instead of a nice, we teach you to use good variable names like screen resolution would be A or something like that. And they convert it all into just the letters A, B, C, and that's called obfuscating the JavaScript, or obfuscating code so that it makes it difficult to read. Because the browser still has to interpret this. The browser is a computer. It doesn't matter what they name it. That's only for our own eyes. But do you think the developers have these like this? No, they run through a compiler of their JavaScript to make it ugly. And Rails has a gem that it uses called the uglifier gem. And it actually takes JavaScript, shrinks all the white space out of it, uglifies it, makes it small and compact, and it does that all automatically inside of this assets folder. So we're about out of time. We'll continue this on tomorrow, where we'll actually change images and make sure everything is working right.